Right, how y'all doing? I've been thinking. The old joke. No, you haven't, mate. You're thick as. I know. I know, but trust me, there's the little the creaky thingy inside there's kind of it's turning a little bit, and some of the tools that are developed for running things and things that they shouldn't are magical, and I believe them to be the future. The thing that I have on my mind at the moment, so we have, obviously, everyone knows about emulation. If you're into retro gaming and things like that, everyone knows about emulation. The idea of having a program or device that runs something, like oversimplification, it tricks this into thinking this is actual hardware. So whatever this may be, be it software or whatever, it makes this think that this is what it was designed to work on and then performs its intended task. It emulates, pretends to be. In the attempt of oversimplifying, I've made things stupid. Emulation's simple. It isn't. I mean, the concept of emulation is very, very simple. So the idea that, like, you don't have to buy an original Nintendo anymore to play NES games, or a GameCube to play GameCube games, or a PS2 to play PS2 games. You can emulate those. You can have a program on a computer or other device and have a dump or image of whatever it is you want to run, and you open it with the thing, and it plays or does whatever it is you intended it to do. I say play because there are situations where, like, it's not just for games, is it? There are other kind of times when you want something to run that is no longer supported, and that's where I'm going with this. I run Linux. I like Linux. In fairness, I like all operating systems. The main three at the moment in this order: Mac OS, Windows, Linux. Wasn't always the case. It used to be. I'm about ready to get murdered here. Linux, Windows, Mac OS. But we're talking a long, long, long time ago. Really long time ago. Everyone says you can't game on Linux. You just can't. And it's not true. If you say to me you can't game on a Mac, it's true. Generally because, and only because, Apple computers aren't generally designed with games in mind. They just ain't. Under any stretch of the imagination, they just don't have the graphical processing horsepower to play games. Even if you spend a couple grand, you're still not going to get the kind of horsepower you need to play games. Which is why I've always found it a bit weird that so many games still get ported to Mac, even though the number of Macs on the market is higher than the number of Linux users, right? But if you were to actually slice into the Mac market share and say how many of those users actually have a machine capable of playing a game, is really quite small. Like, I mean, I see things like that small slice every day. Right? But that's small. You shouldn't be wasting your time on that. So Linux can play games, and there's an array of fantastic tools to allow Linux users to play games, and I think they're the future. I think everyone has to kind of get used to this. Even Windows users. Console users are probably... Modern day console users, not so much. Retro gamers are into emulation and stuff, and I'm not saying that this stuff is emulation, but it's It's a wonderful hack to allow things that aren't supported to run where they're not supposed to. So if you've got the power, if you've got the horsepower, there are tools on Linux that allow you to run Windows games. If you have Steam, there's literally a thing called Steam Play in it. And what that is like I've already explained this once before, or many a times over the years to different people in different places, but to rehash, basically it's imagine it's a container of WINE. WINE is not an emulator, recursive acronym, right? And DXVK, DirectX to Vulkan. And the idea of that is that it translates DirectX calls to Vulkan. Not going into what those are, but basically those two things smushed together make Steam Play, and Steam Play is basically a one-click go job to configure those two things to run Windows games on Linux. And it's running really, really, really well. Like, I built this machine last year. I only recently got it properly running because I had some supply issues and my power supply fluffed it and it killed my motherboard, and then I had to get parts, and in the middle of a time when the world is like, getting parts, not a thing. In fact, I've actually got a couple of machines around here that need graphics cards. They ain't likely ever to see the light of day again, because I ain't likely ever to see a graphics card again. But built this machine, got Linux running on it, and I avoided Steam Play like the plague. I avoided Proton like the plague. Proton is Steam Play, which is DXVK and WINE. I avoided it like the plague. I've tried it before, and on my older machines, it worked, but depending on the game, I didn't really have the horsepower for it. And I wanted to go pure Linux binaries, native all the way, show support for developers, for making Linux games. I'm running open source drivers on everything that I can. Gravy, even put AMD graphics card in here because I wanted to run the open drivers rather than NVIDIA's proprietary. I was like, why am I fighting it? It's a fantastic tool. It's a fantastic tool, and I should be screaming from the highest peaks to the world going, this stuff works and you're going to need it one day, even if you're not on Linux. I mean, it's fantastic. Games that we would never see because people will never invest, even though a Linux... So what I was going on with the Mac thing earlier, it's a lot cheaper and easier to build a Linux gaming PC than it is to buy a Mac that can play games. Yet for some reason people were still focusing on developing for Mac because they had a bigger market share than Linux. It was weird. Then Valve comes along, makes the Steam machines. They flop with their Steam OS. That was a Debian-based thingamabobber. It didn't really work because, again, there weren't that many Linux native games on Steam. There were loads, but they weren't what people want to play. There weren't no GTAs and CODs and stuff like that. So people were like, can't play games. Can't play games. Linux can't play games. Why would you have one of those? And the people were buying Steam machines, reviewing Steam machines after installing Windows on them. So then it's not a Steam machine anymore, is it? It's a Windows PC. Which was fucking dumb. But then Steam Play and Proton becomes a thing, and it gets better and better and better. And it's been going on for a good few years now, I guess. And it's fantastic. Now, the reason I say... I've re-enabled it on this machine so I could play Hades again. Because occasionally I do boot into Windows from time to time. There is a Windows drive in here, but I spend majority of my time in Linux. I just prefer the way Linux works. I prefer the way Linux looks. It's not to say it's always simple. It's not to say it's always smooth. Sometimes, you just want to shake it, but Windows does that to me too. So you work with what you got, right? But I mean, I like the way Linux works. I like the way I can customize it, even though I don't customize much. But I like it. It's a viable thing, and I don't have to pay anything for it. You can always pirate Windows. Don't bother. Shit. And I don't want adverts for Candy Crush in my start bar, so shove that one up your ass. Anyway, the reason I say other people are going to need it too is simply because, so I can now play games I never realistically could because companies would never invest in my operating system. Good job, Valve. Good job, everyone else that's working on Wine and DXVK and putting it all together into Proton and Steam. Good job. Keep going. Have you ever been a Windows user and gone, I want to play this game, oh shit, why doesn't that work anymore? Like, I don't know, you used to play it in Windows 7 and you upgraded to Windows 10 and all of a sudden your game didn't work. I've been one of those users because I had a few games back in the day. I won't say which ones because it doesn't really matter because they've had refreshers since, but once upon a time, there were games that I wanted to play, and I hung out. I was like, no man, I'm not upgrading one of my machines because, when Windows 10 was gone free, I didn't use Windows that much back then. And in fairness, some of these games, I was running in Wine. Wine is not an emulator thing. I was running them in Linux. But some of them I had a bit of trouble to get working in Linux because they had like some hooky dodgy translation patches in them or whatever, and so to save myself a headache, I had a Windows 7 machine just kind of sat around doing absolutely nothing. In fact, my Linux gaming machine also had another driver in it just for like a handful of games. Cause you know how people build those like 486 machines so they can play old DOS games. They just have them sat in the corner of the room so they can go and play like, Zork and stuff like that. Like, yeah, I'm playing it on actual hardware rather than emulating it. That kind of groove, because sometimes it just feels right to do it that way. I didn't upgrade the operating systems to play these games, and if I did, I'd have had to do a load of jiggery-pokery to get the damn things to work again. It's just a pain in the arse. It's a ball ache. I did at one point update the machines to see what I would have to do to get them to work. And I was like, this is so messy. So basically the idea is that sometimes when an operating system is updated, some features or something that something relies on sometimes they get taken away. I can remember this happened with me and Mac OS years and years and years ago. They went from big cats to mountains or some, I don't know, national parks or whatever it was they went to. And there was this one piece of software that I loved so much. It was called Ubercaster. It's a fantastic live podcasting app. In my opinion, strangely enough, it was one of my favourite applications on the Mac. It was probably one of the only reasons I stayed on the Mac. It was a great piece of software. It really, really was. And I mean, there's loads of stuff like it now, but it was so good at the time. So good at the time. But as the operating system got updated, some of the things that Ubercaster relied on to work kind of went away or weren't supported anymore, and so Ubercaster just stopped working, and the developer was just like, I can't, it's a lot of time to make this, and it's going to take, and so Ubercaster just went away. And I got really pissed off, because that was a great piece of software. And I moved. I went elsewhere. I came back to Windows, I had Linux on the side, and eventually that went shithouse too when Adobe pissed me off. And I was like, look, you know what? There's nothing keeping me here anymore. I'm gonna move. I'm just gonna move. I'm not giving them my money anymore. I'm gonna talk my wallet. I'm gonna move. So sometimes things go away. Important pieces for software just go away and they stop working. And that's kind of what happened when 7 went to 10. A lot of my games stopped working. If anyone's played games from before those days, like if you had to go into the old compatibility tabs and click all these fancy they weren't fancy settings, like a drop down. Do you want to run it in compatibility mode? Yeah, mate, Windows 95, and then hope it worked. And you had that with like Windows XP as well. Just sometimes things change and things break, and those games will go away. So tools like Steam Play and Proton are fantastic, because imagine at some point, I don't know if you're ever going to have to use them as a Windows user, but I just have this vision that one day there's going to come a time when we're going to say, I want to play GTA 5, and we're on the next 5 like Windows releases are rolled out, and that game just doesn't work anymore. Like, just natively it doesn't work. But there's these magic tools, Steam Play, Proton, WINE+DXVK, that would allow us to play these games, because by that time compatibility would be so good. You just have one clicks to run all of this old stuff. And because it's constantly being maintained, the compatibility is not, they're not going to just go, do we really need to support that anymore? Well, it's not a full operating system, is it? It's just a combination of packages that they're just going to keep on adding compatibility to it. You ain't going to have to worry if your operating system supports it, as long as this wonderful, like, sandboxy magic program wrappery dealio does the job. It's surprising, well, it isn't surprising actually, that they binned off support on the Mac. I guess because the Macs don't have the hardware support for it. They're not really going to develop for it. But I think at some point people are just going to have to get over the fact that maybe Windows isn't the way to go anymore. I mean, maybe right now it is, but in the future you are likely going to have to run the same kind of tools I do now to get things to run. And that's okay, because they're magic. It's like literally magic. Just thinking about how annoying it used to be to get things to run on hardware it wasn't supposed to. I remember trying to run games on Mac that weren't supposed to. One of the games I used to like playing was Steins Gate. Steins Gate didn't have, it was a visual novel. Steins Gate didn't have a Mac installer. So I had to use like Wine Bottler. So it was a wine wrapper. Get that to work. Tried to get Chaos Head to work. Wouldn't go. It's another visual novel. Then maybe moving over to Linux. I would be able to do the same thing. I could run that Windows game because it didn't have Linux support. I could run it in Linux through a wine wrapper, but I'd have to sit there and fiddle with it to get it to work properly. Now it's just a one-click and go deal, and you're off to the races, mate. You just press the button. You don't even have to have a brain. You just go, I want to play that. Click it. It downloads. It does the thing, and it goes, yep, launch. It's amazeballs. It really is. I was trying to think of some other examples, but then I lost my train of thought. Just some other things that I'd tried to get running back in the day through Wine and different wrappers and stuff, and they just wouldn't work. Or, actually, that's another one. Phantasy Star Online. Love me some Phantasy Star Online. It's one of my favourite games as a kid. They released it on PC as Phantasy Star Blueburst. There are still private servers up and running of it. By the way, for anyone unaware, a few people have been talking about beat time recently, which is the swatch time where it's set to GMT +1. Is it GMT +1? And then the day is divided into 1,000. But beat time was in fucking Phantasy Star, mate. Everyone used to be synchronized to beat time. The Sega did a thing to make it so that the Dreamcast and the because if you didn't set beat time is generally configured based on your system clock, and if you didn't set your Dreamcast clock, well then your fucking beats would be wrong, right? Your time would be wrong, obviously. So Sega were actually one of these crazies that went, you know what, we're going to synchronize everything. Even if you stuffed it, we'll do it for you. And so they did this whole magic jiggery-pokery thing to get it all. Phantasy Star was great. And that was a nice introduction to beat time for anyone that didn't know that it existed beforehand. It came out in like 1998, but it was implemented into Phantasy Star Online in the 2000s, I guess. I don't know. Great game. Could I get Blueburst to work on Linux? I did some jiggery... I fucked about with it for ages to get it to work, but it never worked quite as well as it probably should. You know? And... I used to play that game on a little netbook, so I could sit and play with my kids, because it just didn't run quite right on Linux. It was playable, just not quite right. Now, over time, I imagine that game would run fine in WINE+DXVK, because there's just so... It's come so much further than when I was faffing about with it years and years and years ago. You don't even have to think to get it to work now, for the most part. You just hit a button, and it goes. There's going to come a time when you're not going to need to be on Windows. You're just not going to need to be. Why not move now and try? Grab some cheap hardware and just give it a go. Now, I'm not trying to sell anyone Linux gaming or Linux hardware. It's not so much a thing. But it's the tools amaze me. I think they're absolutely brilliant. But as long as those tools are supported, you know, you're going to be able to play any game from any time period and not realistically have to worry about it. I would imagine that as long as a game was supported, it will continue to be supported because they're only updating the compatibility for it. They're not really, as I say, it's not a full operating system where they're going to go, well, we're going to take this away because we don't need that anymore. We're going to take that away because we've updated it to this thing. They don't need to do that because it's not an operating system. So, what are your thoughts? Has anyone, you know, tried to play a classic game on a modern operating system and gone, shit, son, this doesn't work anymore, and then got really bummed out? Oh, I have. Lots. I've mentioned a few. Man, I really love Phantasy Star. Such a great game. Need to find my copy of the Phantasy Star anime. Stop getting distracted! Well, yeah, what games have you tried to play that have stopped working? Really annoys me when games just go away too. That fucking really gets on my nerves. But who's tried to game on a Mac? Back in the Doom 3 days? Not good. Back in the Doom 3 and Rainbow Six 3 days. Oh, bad times, man. Bad times. Really bad times. Great for editing video and music production, but not so great for playing games. No. But now we have the tools. Emulation too. Emulation's a great thing. It's absolutely brilliant. That and the what's it called? What the fuck is it called? I've gone and forgot what it is now. The where we're actually putting hardware on. My brain's gone. Like, that's a surprise. Oh no, what is it? It's the same thing that the analog systems are made of. So if you've ever seen any of those retro consoles from analog, they have you know, magic chips in them that make all. There's no emulation involved. The chips have been programmed to do ASICs. Is that what I'm thinking of? I can't think. It's too late for this. DOSBox. DOSBox is great. Need to play me some text adventures. I'm heading off. I just wanted to make a video about how I really do think that a lot of the tools that I'm using now are tools that everyone else is. That you're going to have to use in the future. Be thankful they're being developed now for folks that use alternative operating systems, because eventually they're going to filter down to you and you're going to benefit from them. Because Windows ain't going to support your shit forever. It doesn't already. we probably support more things. We probably support more Windowsy stuff on Linux now over a wider time period than Windows does. Remember there used to be a thing about, was it LibreOffice? LibreOffice supports more Word formats than Word. Like they're really old, like Microsoft Office formats. They don't support those anymore, but don't worry, because we do. It's rad. Right, I'm heading off. I've been rambling for too long. That made no sense at all. Magic. One-click installs. Good times. Don't fight it. And I'll see you all with a bit of luck in the next one.